I've already covered the career of one talented dancer. Today, it's time for his colleague Steven Seagal, a once famous actor, a big enthusiast of broken legs and living proof that the universe is constantly expanding. Steven shot to fame fast, but just as quickly crashed into the world of straight-to-video releases. He could have avoided that, but, well. So, how did Seagal's star rise in Hollywood? Which movie destroyed his career? How did he manage to mess with Die Hard? Why does John Wick look like a kid's morning cartoon compared to some of Seagal's films? And how did Steven get cut out of his own movie? Watch the video and find out. Let's go. Before breaking into Hollywood, Steven was doing just fine, financially, socially, and career-wise. His first experience in the film industry came while he was still living in Japan. One of his masters recommended him as a katana fight expert for the movie The Challenge in 1982. Steven not only choreographed the fights there, but also brought in his own students as extras. Shortly after, Steven moved to Hollywood. Maybe he wanted his dojo closer to the heart of the film industry, hoping to land another gig as a combat expert. Go with the flow and create opportunities. Classic Aikido philosophy, and it started working. By 1983, Seagal had already contributed to the fight scenes in the unofficial Bond film Never Say Never Again, the one where Sean Connery played Bond for the last time. No one knows exactly what Steven had in mind when opening this Aikido club, but reality outdid any plans he might have had anyway. One day, a visitor was so inspired by the sight of Steven juggling with his students with a stone-cold expression on his face that he thought, like, this guy belongs on TV, so the whole world can be inspired. And that visitor wasn't just some nobody. He was Michael Ovitz, a Hollywood super agent. Ovitz immediately set the wheels in motion. He funded a 5-minute screen test for Seagal, took the tape to Warner Brothers, and the studio execs were just as impressed. Wow. But what really sealed the deal was Steven's live performance. Right there in one of Warner's studio lots, he brought in his students and immediately dominated, unleashing a bunch of Hadoukens and tossing his students around like rag dolls. Seagal later admitted that staging the show took him a few days, but it was worth it. Warner Studios' bosses were sold, and they handed him the lead role in the 1988 action movie Above the Law. And just like that, the so-called golden era of Steven Seagal had begun. Above the Law didn't exactly crush the box office, but costing $7 million and collecting 19, it not only broke even, but also made a profit for the studio. Given the genre, you'd expect critics to rip it apart, but surprisingly they didn't. Most of them actually liked it, including Roger Ebert. And let's not forget, this was a movie starring some random gym coach. Even more surprising is that Seagal wasn't the only newcomer that year. Around the same time, and also from Warner Studios, Bloodsport hit theaters, starring another unknown, some Belgian ballet master. Van Damme's film had an even smaller budget, much smaller one, but grossed even more than Above the Law, becoming a huge hit. The studio nailed the audience demand, launching 2 new action stars in a single year. After this success, Steven got the message loud and clear. He quit running his Aikido club and fully committed to movies. The actor took his time picking the right script for his second film, wanting something special. That's how Hard to Kill was born. A movie where Seagal gets shot, spends 7 years in a coma, and wakes up to get revenge. And it became a hit as well, pulling in around $50 million with a budget of $12. Adjusted for inflation, that's like a $20 million film earning close to $100 million. Numbers that would make Keanu Reeves and John Wick look nervously over their shoulders. Then followed Marked for Death and Out for Justice, both films sticking to the same budget to box office ratio, meaning they were solid wins. Out for Justice made slightly less, but here the film's brutality might have been the reason. It was easily the most violent entry in Steven's career and one of the most brutal action films of 1990. And that was the censored version, where a good chunk of broken necks and shattered teeth was already cut out. From the dramatic perspective, this is where a failure or some personal crisis would usually happen and balance out this winning streak. But instead, Seagal's next film didn't just become his biggest box office success. It also marked the beginning of a new chapter in his career, the so-called Silver Era. And that's when his downfall will eventually occur. In time. Warner Brothers bought the script for Under Siege, originally titled Dreadnought, for a whopping $1 million from J.F. Lawton. The Pretty Woman screenwriter went all out, packing his draft with nuclear wars, sinking aircraft carriers, and non-stop explosions, sending things flying into space. When the studio saw the price tag on that awesomeness, they politely asked Lawton to curb his enthusiasm and bring the costs down to something less than a trip to Alpha Centauri. The script was toned down, but the title Dreadnought stuck for a while. For those unfamiliar, a dreadnought is an old-school battleship, a name hinting that an aging warship would make a final stand. Seagal was offered a then-record $5 million paycheck, and he immediately said yes. But the role required a sacrifice. In the Navy, hair longer than 10 centimeters was prohibited, meaning the actor was ordered to get rid of his now iconic ponytail. Steven tried to fight for it, suggesting his hero was such a legend that the president himself had given him some special permission to keep hair. The studio listened politely, and then firmly insisted on visiting a barber. The film was directed by Andrew Davis, the same guy who made Seagal's debut film, Above the Law. Back in the late 80s and 90s, Davis couldn't stop talking about Steven in interviews. How skilled he was, how much he had grown since his first film, how he had become a big professional. 20 years later, his tune had changed though. In later interviews, Davis admitted he hadn't even wanted to direct Under Siege because of this big professional in the cast. The director only agreed when he found out the big pro would be on screen for only about half the runtime, meaning he wouldn't get in the way too much. While Davis stayed on, Pamela Anderson did not.
No, God, please, no!
She was almost cast in the lead female role, but Steven ruined that.
No!
According to Anderson, she was told there were hundreds of other women waiting outside for the part, and if she wanted it, she'd have to let the film's big star get a bit handsy. Anderson refused and walked out. The role went to Erika Eleniak, her Baywatch co-star. Unlike Anderson, Erika later said Seagal had acted like a perfect gentleman. Gary Busey, however, strongly disagreed. He claimed he personally witnessed Steven trying to corner Erika multiple times and had even stepped in to stop this mess. So, two possibilities here. Either the actress has a very unusual definition of gentleman, or Anderson and Busey were straight up lying. Both had reasons to dislike Seagal. Anderson lost a role because of him, and Busey, well, their story gets more interesting later. Filming took just 2.5 months, and the studio held a test screening. Audiences loved the film, but hated the title. No one understood what a dreadnought had to do with a movie about Seagal punching bad guys. That's when the title was changed to Under Siege. At the time, it became the most expensive film ever not to have a press screening. The studio believed film critics were too biased against action flicks, especially ones starring Seagal, and would flood the media with negative reviews that could hurt the box office. Ironically, they didn't need to worry. Under Siege became one of Steven's best-reviewed films. It was also his biggest box office hit, pulling in $157 million worldwide, costing $35. Word of mouth pushed it to blockbuster status, so much actually that it even affected Die Hard 3. The original plan was for Bruce Willis to save hostages on a ship, but because it was too similar to Under Siege, the entire script had to be rewritten. A straight flush with 5 successful films in a row is a rare thing. Maybe exactly this easiness eventually backfired on Steven, because by this point he had developed a massive ego and a full-blown prima donna complex. And when that mixes with a difficult personality, the outcome is almost never nice. After Under Siege hit the jackpot, Hollywood's favorite bone breaker suddenly decided he was also a talented director. 2 major studios supported this delusion: 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers. Fox offered Seagal the director's chair and the lead role in Man of Honor, along with a $30 million budget to creatively break as many Italian gangsters' necks as possible. Not bad, you might say. But Warner Studios gave the actor an even better deal. Like, pick any script you want, take even more money, but sign on for the inevitable sequel to Under Siege. This one was greenlit immediately after the first one became a hit. Steven knew he had Warner execs' balls right in his hands. He negotiated his directorial debut's budget up to $40 million and picked the script on deadly ground. Then, he waved Fox goodbye and got to work. And it suddenly turned out a talented person isn't necessarily talented at everything. The production was a disaster. Steven kept rewriting scenes in a script he had personally chosen, reshooting entire sequences, and even getting into fights with stuntmen. All that blew the budget up to $50 million. When On Deadly Ground was screened for test audiences, people literally fell asleep. The original ending was Lord of the Rings director's cut style, where the action is already over, but the heroes are drinking, chatting, creating families, and making kids. In Seagal's version, nature itself was these heroes. Deer and rabbits ran around, dolphins leaped out of the ocean, and all living things rejoiced because Steven had once again saved them. The humanity, however, was unthankful. First, the film grossed just $39 million. Second, for this one, Seagal earned his first ever Golden Raspberry nomination in 1995. Not just one, but 3. Worst Actor, Worst Director, and Worst Picture. And for Worst Director, he got it. Observing this disaster, Warner Studios pulled the movie from international release to cut losses and avoid further embarrassment. This one failure became a turning point in Steven's career. A lifeline remained, of course. After letting the actor portray a talented director for $50 million, Warner Brothers was still willing to film Under Siege 2 with Steven. And at this point, anyone with common sense would have taken the hint from the universe, calmed down a little bit, and delivered a strong sequel. But Seagal? Oh no, that train had already left the station. First, Steven didn't even bother getting in shape for the movie. By the mid-90s, his tendency toward, well, let's say toward a wider format was already pretty obvious. But instead of dieting or training, he just wore a corset to look slimmer. Second, the actor had absolutely no plans to stop interfering in the filmmaking process. Director Jeff Murphy later recalled that throughout the shoot, Seagal constantly gave highly important advice on how to properly direct a movie. According to rumors, Gary Oldman, Lawrence Fishburne, and Jeff Goldblum all turned down the role of the main villain just to avoid dealing with Seagal's expert insights. Originally, Under Siege sequel was supposed to bring back Gary Busey as one of the villains, despite the fact that his character had been fed to the fish in the first movie. But one of the producers got excited about the idea of a shocking plot twist and signed Busey for the sequel without Steven's approval. The contract was on a pay-or-play basis, meaning Busey would get paid anyway, whether he appeared in the film or not. When Seagal came back from vacation and found out about this deal behind his back, he kicked both the producer and Busey off the film, allegedly paying Busey $750,000 out of his own pocket as compensation. So, when Busey later trashed Steven in interviews, it's safe to assume he might have been just a little bit unhappy about getting thrown out of the movie. And also, let's not forget that...
Who is the biggest jerk? Gary Busey.
But even without Busey, Seagal still managed to mess things up. First came fresh accusations that female roles in the sequel were only given to actresses who agreed for a rendezvous with the actor. Those who refused lost their roles and later talked about it in interviews. As if it wasn't enough, then environmentalists came after Steven. The thing is that at one point he decided the rocks in the scene looked pretty unconvincing. So without much fuss, they were repainted in a more rock-appropriate shade, whatever that means. Environmental groups called this an unforgivable crime against nature, and Warner Studios had to smooth things over with an undisclosed settlement. Maybe they used this money to repaint the rocks back. I mean, who knows? A fun twist here. Under Siege 2 wasn't originally a sequel at all. The script was actually called Dark Territory and was written by a then-unknown Matt Reeves. Yes, that very guy who's now in charge of the Batman and other DC projects. But back in the 90s, Warner Brothers simply bought his script, slapped Under Siege 2 title on it, and tweaked the plot to add an unstoppable action hero. Basically Batman, but on a train. The first Under Siege had a budget of $30 million, and for the sequel it was doubled. Adjusted for today's prices, that would be like spending $110 million on an action movie. Where did all that money go? The film seems fairly small scale, right? Well, not exactly. For example, the train cars you see in the movie were all built from scratch. These were full-sized and functional, and they were later reused in other Hollywood films. During post-production, there was again a lot of drama. The director and editing team begged Warner Brothers to do something about Seagal, who refused to leave the editing room. The talented actor wasn't just hanging out there drinking beer or something. He was actively controlling the process, demanding the movie be cut exactly the way he envisioned. The studio ignored the complaints, so the final version that hit theaters is actually Steven's, the one he personally supervised. Just before release, the film's original title, Dark Territory, was added as a subtitle, making it Under Siege 2 Dark Territory. At the time, adding subtitles to sequels was considered cool, and plain numbers felt like some old fart stuff. The movie hit theaters in 1995 and immediately lost to Apollo 13.
Houston, we have a problem.
Within a couple of weeks, it had dropped out of the top 10 completely. In the end, the final box office total was just $105 million. If the costs had been the same as the first movie, this would have been fine. But with a $60 million budget, it wasn't nearly enough to be profitable. Perhaps the studio made some money back from home video sales, but there's no hard data on that. At this point, a major action star like Seagal could still have bounced back, even after 2 big flops in a row. He could have done that with the Executive Decision Project, which was set to release right after Under Siege 2. But things went so horribly wrong that Steven ended up being cut out of his own movie where he was supposed to be the main star. In the mid-90s, Warner Brothers found the script for Executive Decision and immediately traded it for Forrest Gump's script, which the studio owned at the time. Today, that deal sounds like something straight out of a comedy sketch, but back then it was dead serious. Forrest Gump was quite risky. The script was raw, the idea of a blissfully clueless protagonist seemed questionable, and analysts were predicting a flop. The success of Rain Man was widely dismissed as some kind of Matrix glitch that just happened to work. Executive Decision, on the other hand, was seen as a guaranteed hit, a top-notch action film dropping right at the peak of the genre's popularity. and there was Steven Seagal, the superstar who was personally interested in the project. So Warner Studios didn't hesitate. They handed Forrest Gump over without a second thought and started prepping for production, looking for a more low-key actor to pair up with Steven. But when everything was set in motion, Seagal delivered two massive flops in a row, On Deadly Ground and Under Siege sequel. He had cost Warner a fortune, so the studio suddenly had second thoughts about betting everything on him again. After some serious brainstorming, the executives decided to not let Seagal carry the movie alone. Instead of casting a sidekick, they brought in a co-lead of equal star power. That's how Kurt Russell landed the role. His recent success in Stargate made him a perfect fit. Steven, of course, wasn't happy about this. As soon as filming began, he started throwing his weight around, clashing with actors and the crew. The worst of it landed on John Leguizamo, who simply couldn't tell whether Seagal was being serious or just messing with him. John occasionally burst out laughing at Seagal's dramatic statements, which only confused and infuriated Steven more. Sometimes he just stared at Leguizamo menacingly, and other times he completely lost it, demanding to know what the hell was so funny. This little detail is actually a perfect example of a certain Steven's personality trait, but we'll get to its significance in his career soon. Maybe the studio would have ignored Seagal's attitude on executive decision, just as they had before. Maybe they even would have tolerated his recent box office failures. But around that time, serious scandals started blowing up around his name. The press was suddenly flooded with Me Too reports on Steven and even claims that he was using his Aikido moves on his wife. After that, Kurt Russell rebelled and told the studio he would just quit if Seagal remained in the lead role. And again, a couple of years ago, Warner Brothers probably would have ignored Russell's ultimatum. Hell, maybe they would have just fired him instead. But at this point, the studio execs were done. They panicked and immediately demanded to rewrite the script, removing Seagal's character as much as possible. Steven tried to put up a fight at first, but quickly backed down. The actor realized that his contract with Warner still had multiple films left, and if he sued the studio, they could terminate the whole deal. And Seagal desperately needed new projects. So, he obediently filmed his character's early demise while his role was split between the other characters. Ironically, the biggest winner here was John Leguizamo. His screen time significantly expanded and the role boosted his career. Most likely, this wouldn't have happened if the original script had stayed as it was. As for the film itself, insiders later claimed it became worse after the rewrites. Cutting Steven's character killed the pacing, and many analysts consider executive decision a textbook example of wasted potential. But even in this weakened form, the movie still pulled in $122 million worldwide on a budget of $55, just above the break-even point. Seagal's name was completely erased from all promotional materials, removed from the opening credits, and barely mentioned on posters, except in a handful of European markets. It's unclear if these measures helped the box office or hurt it. Quickly ditching Steven in executive decision didn't mean Warner was ready to fully abandon their star. He needed saving, and the studio tried to do it with two films, The Glimmer Man and Fire Down Below. But by that point, dark clouds had gathered over Seagal, and Warner wasn't willing to risk serious money on The Glimmer Man. The studio slashed the budget from $75 million to $45 million. After that, Tommy Lee Jones ran from the project, and his role was handed to Brian Cox. Cutting costs meant several key action scenes and entire story arcs were scrapped, which unsurprisingly didn't do the film any favors. To make things worse, Steven had become completely lazy, constantly showing up late and delaying production. The crew was often forced to improvise, further butchering an already crippled script. If The Glimmer Man flopped hard, grossing just $20 million on a $45 budget, then Fire Down Below literally lit a fire under Warner Brothers execs' asses. Thinking that The Glimmer Man failed because of the budget cuts, Warner went all in on the next Seagal film, dropping $60 million. The same massive budget as Under Siege sequel, by the way, which had already been a disappointment with its $105 million box office. And Fire Down Below made not 105, not even 55, but miserable 16. One of the reasons for such a crappy result is perhaps that the film didn't actually look pricey. For comparison, The Matrix, released just a year later, only cost $3 million more and still looks amazing. And a final punch, Seagal got 4 Golden Raspberry nominations for this film. After burning in cinematic hell alongside Steven with Fire Down Below, Warner decided to hit pause. They probably figured audiences just wanted a break and the actor's next film needed time to settle. That next collaboration took 4 years to materialize, during which Seagal's only somewhat notable project was The Patriot, a movie where he starred alongside his own daughter. In 2001, Warner Brothers released the final Seagal movie under their mutual contract. Exit Wounds was produced by Joel Silver, the guy behind Lethal Weapon and Die Hard, and directed by Andrzej Bartkowiak, who would later give us Doom. The film's budget is a bit of a mystery. Some sources claim it was $33 million, while others insist on 55. This difference is huge, considering the movie earned 80. If the budget was $33 million, it was a legit success. Steven's first in almost a decade. But if it was closer to 50, well, that's a whole different story. Given that people at the time were calling it Seagal's big comeback and an unexpected hit, the film likely at least broke even. And right here, or maybe even a bit earlier, Steven actually had a real shot at a career comeback. Maybe if he had followed the same playbook as other aging action stars, dipping into comedy for a while. The best example is Arnie, of course. Stallone tried this as well with Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. Bruce Willis always blended action with humor. Jackie Chan? Well, that's his entire thing. Seagal, on the other hand, either had no sense of humor and zero self-roasting skills, or just didn't even try. Maybe all of the above. By most accounts, his humorless nature was a running joke on set. At the same time, Steven completely stopped caring about staying in shape, taking up more and more space in the frame each year, but still kept portraying serious action heroes. Of course, audiences quickly notice this kind of BS and don't fall for it. In comedies, being out of shape could have actually become a winning move. These are just assumptions, of course. In reality, Exit Wounds was the last Seagal film to get a budget over $20 million. And after the 2002 monstrosity that was Half Past Dead, the average budget of his films crashed down to about $6 million. At that point, the actor's movies had fully transitioned into straight-to-video releases designed exclusively for hardcore fans of the world's most deadpan Aikido enthusiast. The only movie with Steven that actually hit theaters during these years was Machete by Robert Rodriguez. Even though Seagal wasn't the main star, he still managed to make it onto the posters and drive some attention. There was also the bizarre reality TV show Steven Seagal Lawman, which ran from 2009 to 2014. The show featured Steven running around Louisiana and Arizona with real-life sheriffs and teaching them Aikido to fight crime or something. Despite fresh harassment scandals surrounding the actor in the early 2000s and 10s, the show actually did pretty well. Some critics even called it a masterpiece of unintentional comedy, whether that was the goal or not. For the past 6 years, Seagal has been completely absent from filmmaking. He moved to Russia and now works as a special representative for humanitarian relations between Russia and the US. Judging by how well that particular field is going, it seems he's slacking off there too, which honestly sums up his career pretty well. Seagal had everything handed to him, became a star overnight, and let his ego bloat to ridiculous proportions, deciding he can just relax and vibe now. As a result, he himself bloated as well. The actor had zero ability or willingness to adapt, which is kind of unexpected from an Aikido guru whose entire philosophy is based on adaptation and redirection. But to be fair, it's insanely hard to avoid catching a bad case of star syndrome when you become famous immediately from your very first movie. In that sense, Steven's career is almost identical to that of a certain Belgian martial artist who loved showing his buttocks on screen, consuming crazy amounts of substances, and driving everyone nuts on set. And actually, we have a whole video on that guy, including the story about the real-life fight between Seagal and Van Damme. Yeah, that really happened. And somehow the universe didn't collapse after that. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Hit like and subscribe if it was of any interest, and see you next time.